So right here. So here you have, same thing, you have here the collecting tubule or collecting duct, different nephrons emptied into it, and then passing down through the medulla, and then eventually you're going to have a bunch of these ducts joining together to form larger ducts called papillary ducts. So here we're looking at one papillary duct here. And then the papillary ducts are going to open at the very tip of the pyramid, and that area is referred to as the renal papilla. And at that point you have urine, and that urine will empty into a minor calyx, which we already talked about before. So that's kind of looking at the whole tubular pathway. So the next thing then we're going to look at are the blood vessels of the kidney. So we're at the bottom of page 58, and we're going to go through the blood vessels. One last thing before we leave all of these pictures. If you want to zoom in on this. Again, our favorite picture looking at renal corpuscle. And then this just shows you that if you go beyond the capsular space, so here's where the filtrate would be, the next part of the tubule is the proximal convoluted tubule, and this picture is showing how you have all these little microvilli associated with the cells of the proximal convoluted tubule. So again, where you're going to have a lot of reabsorption occurring. So I just wanted to show you that before we look at all the different blood vessels associated with the kidney. So here we're looking at figure 26.4, and if you pull away a little bit, you can see here it gives a whole list of the blood vessels that we're going to be looking at. So you can see it's going from red, so you know these are arteries filled with oxygenated blood, and then down to the blue, which are going to be the veins associated with the kidney. So just to quickly go through, we have each kidney is going to receive a renal artery, and that's the major branch coming off the descending aorta. And the kidney gets about 20% of all of the total cardiac output. So you get over 1 liter of blood passing through the 2 kidneys per minute. So that's a lot of blood for some organs that aren't that big. But little of this blood is for the kidney cell nutrition. So it's not like these kidney cells that have really, really high metabolism and they need a lot of oxygen and they need a lot of glucose. That's not why all this blood is coming to the kidneys. The reason all this blood is flowing to the kidneys is because of the function of the kidneys, and that's to maintain homeostasis. So the kidneys are going to look at the blood and they're going to decide what we want to keep in the body and what we want to get rid of from the body in the form of urine. So we're going to look at the blood vessels. I'm just looking for the page that has the blood vessels on it. Here we go. So we're at the top of page 59. So again, if we're looking back at this picture, here's the renal artery. It enters the kidney at that indentation, that area here called the hilum or the hilus. And once it's entered into the kidney, the renal artery starts dividing. So what we're doing now is just talking, since arteries divide, we're going from progressively bigger arteries to smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller arterioles. So here we have the first division, which are the segmental arteries. Can you focus on? So here you have the segmental arteries, and then each segmental artery is going to divide into interlobar arteries. So inter means between, and last time we talked about what makes up a lobe of the kidney. So one pyramid plus the overlying cortex plus half of a column on each side of the pyramid is going to make up a lobe. So you're going to see these interlobar arteries running sort of between the pyramids. The interlobar arteries are going to branch into arcuate arteries. So their name kind of tells you their shape. They form like an arc.
Like an arc?
Yeah, an arc or an arch.
Arch.
Yeah, over the pyramid, over kind of the base of the pyramid here. So, and because they're at sort of the base of the pyramid, they're going to be located, these arcuate arteries are at the junction between the cortex and the medulla, where you see the pyramid. Then once you have the arcuate arteries, they're going to further branch into these little interlobular arteries. So those are smaller than the interlobar arteries. And they're going to travel through the cortex towards the surface of the kidney. And then we get to kind of more microscopic. Now we're going to look at the interlobular arteries are going to branch into the afferent arterioles. So if we look at back at this picture here. So we look here again. You're now looking at here is the afferent arterioles. The afferent arteriole is leading into the renal corpuscle and is going to then empty into the glomerulus, or the capillaries that make up the glomerulus. So the glomerular filtrate again formed here in the glomerulus. And then after you have capillaries, then what you should have after that usually are veins. So usually it goes arterial, capillary, and then venule. But in this case, it's a little weird. So the kidney is weird in that you don't have a venule after these capillaries. What you have leaving from the capillaries is another arteriole. So here's afferent arteriole, and then glomerular capillaries, and then leaving is the efferent arteriole. So E for exiting the glomerulus. So those are the efferent arterioles. Then the efferent arterioles, they're going to further feed into capillaries. And this time we're going to call these capillaries the peritubular capillaries. So, and we're going to look at this picture here. So if you the word peri, P-E-R, are not word, but the prefix peri is like something that goes around, like the perimeter is around. So the peritubular capillaries are going to surround the tubule. So we look again, here we have a nephron. This is showing you afferent arteriole leading into glomerular capillaries, efferent arteriole leaving from the glomerulus, and then feeding into all of these peritubular capillaries that surround the rest of the tubule. So proximal convoluted tubule and loop of Henle and all of that would be surrounded by the peritubular capillaries. Then we have an exception. We have something called the vasa recta, and we'll come back to the vasa recta, but it's a thin-walled vessel which extends from the efferent arteriole, but only in juxtamedullary nephrons. So we have cortical nephrons that make up about 85%, the majority of the nephrons. And then we have those juxtamedullary nephrons. They're the ones that have the really long loops of Henle. And the vasa recta are going to be these vessels associated with juxtamedullary nephrons. And why they're important is that they're going to be involved in concentrating the urine. So juxtamedullary nephrons, vasa recta, that's going to be what we're going to be talking about when we talk about urine concentration. Now, once we leave the peritubular capillaries, or in the case of the juxtamedullary nephrons, the vasa recta, then everything gets normal. So these capillaries are normal in that they empty into veins called the interlobular veins, and then those veins ultimately end up emptying into the renal vein. And the renal vein is going to be the vein that leaves the kidney. And the veins follow the same course of the arteries. They have the same names. So blood flows kind of, so if you memorize the arteries, then the veins are going to have similar names, just going in the opposite direction. So again, note, blood flows through two sequential series of capillary beds. The first is the glomerulus. The second are the peritubular capillaries. Now, having this arterial leading to glomerulus, leading to another arterial, what you have then is that you are going to then have arterioles leading to and from capillaries. And this is going to allow for more of an efficient kidney function. So smooth muscle and arterial wall permits constriction or dilation depending on the condition, and we already know that from when we talked about all the blood vessels. And what this allows for is pretty constant blood pressure in the glomerulus being maintained. So kind of a note too is that the glomerular capillaries, when we looked at the glomerular capillaries, we saw that was where the filtrate was being formed. And then when we're going to be looking at the peritubular capillaries, that's where you're going to get filtrate being reclaimed or returning to the blood. So this is where you have filtrate, it's leaving the blood, but then we don't want to get rid of all that. We don't want everything that ends up in the filtrate ending up in the urine. So we need to be able to get some of it back into the bloodstream, and so that it gets reclaimed by the peritubular capillaries. Okay. So one last thing, we're going to head up to the top of page 60. And the top of page 60 is talking about the juxtaglomerular complex. Juxtaglomerular complex or juxtaglomerular apparatus. So, our favorite picture. Yay! So this is what we're looking at here. So if we go out a little bit. So we just looked here at the afferent arteriole that was bringing blood into the glomerulus. And we want to be looking at that afferent arteriole again when we're talking about this juxtaglomerular apparatus. And specifically, we're looking at those cells right here. Okay? And those cells, part of the afferent arteriole are called juxtaglomerular cells. Now, if you look at these cells here, do you see how they're kind of talking to these cells here? So they're communicating with each other. These juxtaglomerular cells are communicating with these cells here. And these cells are called the macula densa cells. And they're part of, and there's disagreement of what they're actually a part of, if they're part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, or they're part of the distal convoluted tubule. So you'll see that in different books it'll say different things. Most of the time I've seen it part of the distal convoluted tubule. Here they're saying it's part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. But these are the macula densa cells, part of the tubule, communicating with the juxtaglomerular cells.